There are moments in your life that arrive disguised as something ordinary, their true weight concealed until long after they have passed. They are the quiet hinges on which the doors of your future swing open or shut. For me, that moment was not a grand declaration or a dramatic event. It was a sound in the dark, a question hanging unanswered in the space between two rooms. It was the soft, hesitant knock on my bedroom door that came after the question, a sound that told me the answer didn't matter. He was coming in anyway. I was not asleep. I had been lying there for what felt like an eternity, caught in that liminal state between exhaustion and an overactive mind, a place I had come to know intimately over the past several months. The apartment was a vessel of silence, the city outside a distant, humming creature. The only immediate sounds were the hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen and the soft, rhythmic pattern of my own breathing. I was tracing the faint lines of moonlight that slipped through the blinds, projecting a fractured, skeletal pattern onto the opposite wall. It was a familiar cartography of loneliness, a map I knew by heart. Then, from the hallway, came the whisper. "Julian? You awake?" It was Leo's voice, hushed and threaded with a weariness that seemed to carry the weight of the entire day. My heart, which had been beating in a slow, steady rhythm, gave a painful lurch, a sudden, panicked bird trapped in the cage of my ribs. Every muscle in my body went rigid. I didn't answer. I couldn't. The question was a delicate, dangerous thing, a baited hook lowered into the deep, still waters of my secret affection for him. To say yes was to invite a conversation I was not prepared for, to open a door I had so carefully kept bolted shut within myself. To say no was a lie, and to remain silent was a gamble, a bet on whether his need for company outweighed his respect for my privacy. I held my breath, listening. The silence stretched, taut and thin, and in it, I heard the universe of things I had never said to him. I heard the echo of every time I had watched him from across a room, the quiet shutter click of my mind capturing an image of him laughing, his head thrown back, the light catching in his eyes. I heard the ghost of every conversation where I had wanted to reach out and smooth the worried line between his brows, but had clasped my hands together instead. All of it rushed into the space created by his simple, whispered question. Then came the sound that shattered the stillness. It wasn't the click of the latch or the creak of the handle. It was a soft, hesitant rapping of knuckles against the wood. Knock, knock. It was impossibly gentle, a sound completely at odds with the force of nature that was Leo. It wasn't a demand for entry. It felt more like an apology. It was the sound of someone standing on a precipice, asking for permission to fall, but already leaning forward, gravity having already made the choice for him. The knock told me he wasn't really asking if I was awake. He was asking if it was okay for him to not be alone. And by knocking before I could answer, he was also telling me that he hoped I would understand his need was too great to wait for a reply. The door opened with a faint sigh of displaced air, a sound I felt more than heard. His silhouette filled the frame, a tall, broad shape against the dim amber glow of the hallway light. He was a cutout of darkness against a slightly less dense darkness, a figure of comforting solidity and terrifying vulnerability. He stood there for a moment, unmoving, and I knew he was letting his eyes adjust, searching the gloom of my room for the shape of me in the bed. I remained perfectly still, a statue carved from anxiety, my blanket pulled up to my chin like a shield. I watched him through my lashes, my breathing shallow, my pulse a frantic drum against my eardrums. This was it. This was the hinge. The moment where the ordinary friendship we had so carefully maintained was about to become something else, something unnamed and uncharted. And as he took that first quiet step into my room, I knew, with a certainty that was both terrifying and thrilling, that I had been waiting for this moment my entire life. To understand the weight of that knock, you have to understand the architecture of our friendship. We had met in college, two celestial bodies from entirely different solar systems somehow pulled into the same unlikely orbit. I was a photography major, quiet and observant by nature, more comfortable behind a lens than in the middle of a conversation. I saw the world in terms of light and shadow, composition and focus. My life was a series of carefully framed moments, and I was content to be the one capturing them, not the one in the center of the frame. Leo was the opposite. He was a force, a whirlwind of easy confidence and booming laughter. He was on the swim team, a physics-defying marvel of muscle and grace in the water, and a gregarious, magnetic presence on land. People orbited him naturally, drawn to his warmth, his uncomplicated kindness. Our meeting was an accident of university housing algorithms. We were assigned as roommates in our sophomore year, a pairing that seemed, on paper, like a clerical error. I remember seeing him for the first time, hauling a duffel bag the size of a small car into our dorm room. His smile, so bright it seemed to generate its own light. My first thought was one of pure, introverted panic. I had envisioned a quiet, studious roommate, someone who would blend into the background. Instead, I had been given the sun. I was convinced it would be a disaster, that I would be a shadow he would barely notice, a piece of furniture in his vibrant, crowded life. But Leo was not what I expected. For all his extroversion, there was a core of surprising perception in him. He seemed to understand, without me ever having to say it, my need for space. He would bring his friends back to the room, and the space would fill with noise and energy, but he would always shoot me a quick, questioning look, a silent, "You okay with this?" And if I gave the slightest shake of my head or looked too engrossed in my work, he would somehow, magically, steer the entire herd out into the hallway or down to the common room. He learned the rhythm of my solitude, the subtle cues that signaled my need to retreat into my own world. He respected the boundaries of my quiet, and in doing so, he became the only person I ever willingly let cross them. Our friendship was built in the quiet hours. It was forged over late-night study sessions where I would help him with the essays he struggled with, my ability with words complementing his ease with numbers and formulas. It was solidified when he would come back from a grueling practice, smelling of chlorine and exhaustion, and collapse on his bed, talking about the pressure, the competition, the seconds he needed to shave off his time. I would just listen, offering nothing but my quiet presence, and somehow, that was enough. He didn't need advice or platitudes. He just needed a space to unload the weight he carried. I became that space, and he, in turn, became my protector. He would fend off overly eager classmates who wanted to collaborate on projects I preferred to do alone, or deflect social invitations he knew would send me into a spiral of anxiety. We were a strange, symbiotic pair, the anchor and the tide. The moment I knew my feelings for him had shifted, had transmuted from friendship into something deeper and more perilous, is as clear to me as a perfectly developed photograph. It was a Tuesday night in early spring. He had a major swim meet the next day, and he was a knot of nervous energy, pacing our small room like a caged animal. He couldn't study. He couldn't watch TV. He couldn't sit still. Finally, he just stopped in the middle of the room and ran a hand through his damp hair, a gesture of pure frustration. I looked up from the contact sheet I was examining and saw him not as Leo, my loud, confident roommate, but as a young man carrying an immense burden, terrified of falling short of the expectations everyone, including himself, had placed upon him. The overhead fluorescent light of the dorm room was harsh and unflattering, but in that moment, it seemed to carve him from marble. It highlighted the tension in his shoulders, the vulnerability in the set of his jaw. And in that sterile, unforgiving light, I saw him. I really saw him. It was as if a lens in my mind had suddenly shifted, bringing a hidden layer of detail into sharp, breathtaking focus. The affection I had for him, the comfortable, platonic warmth, suddenly deepened, its color saturating into a hue I had never seen before. It was love. The realization didn't crash over me like a wave. It was quieter, more insidious, like the slow, inexorable rise of the tide, until I was standing in it, submerged, and I couldn't remember what it felt like to be on dry land. The feeling was terrifying. It was a secret that I knew, instinctively, I had to keep. Our friendship was a delicate, perfectly balanced ecosystem. My love for him felt like an invasive species, something that could choke the life out of the comfortable home we had built. To confess it would be to risk everything, to shatter the easy trust between us. He was straight, as far as I knew. He dated girls, talked about them with the same easy charm he applied to everything else. To introduce this new, complicated variable into our equation felt like an act of selfish vandalism. So I did what I did best. I observed. I documented. I locked the truth away in the darkroom of my heart and resolved to never let it see the light of day. After college, We made the decision that surprised everyone but us. We got an apartment together. Our friends couldn't understand it. "Aren't you tired of living with him?" they'd ask. But the thought of not living with him felt like a kind of amputation. Our lives had become so intertwined, our rhythms so synchronized, that navigating the world without his steady presence felt impossible. Our two-bedroom apartment became our sanctuary, a continuation of the quiet understanding we had established in that tiny dorm room. The dynamic remained the same. He was the sun, I was the planet that quietly circled him, content in my orbit. I built a career as a freelance photographer, turning my quiet observations into a living. He climbed the corporate ladder at a software engineering firm, his easy charisma making him a natural leader. He still dated a string of perfectly nice, perfectly normal women who would come and go. I would be polite, make small talk, and then retreat to my room, the emotional equivalent of holding my breath until the pressure passed. And through it all, my secret remained. It was a low, constant hum beneath the surface of our friendship, a background radiation I had learned to live with. It was the ache in my chest when he would describe a perfect date, the pang of jealousy so sharp, and sudden it felt like a physical blow. It was the quiet joy of cooking him dinner when he came home late from work, a small, permissible act of care that felt like a lifeline. I had accepted it as a permanent part of my internal landscape, a melancholy but beautiful feature, like a lone, windswept tree on a cliffside. I never imagined it would ever be anything more than that. I had built the walls of my fortress high and strong. I was safe inside, and our friendship was safe outside. I believed those walls were impenetrable. I had forgotten, however, that a fortress can just as easily become a prison, and I had severely underestimated the power of a heart in crisis to tear down walls, brick by painstaking brick. The shift began, as so many seismic changes do, with a tremor from an external source. It was a phone call. Leo had been dating a woman named Sarah for nearly a year. She was smart and funny, and, from what I could tell, genuinely adored him. She was the most serious relationship he had been in since I'd known him. I had even started to prepare myself for the inevitable, for the day he would tell me he and Sarah were moving in together, that our strange, cohabitating chapter was coming to an end. I had rehearsed the smile I would give him, the words of congratulations I would offer. I was ready for the heartbreak. I was not, however, ready for the phone call I received on a rainy Tuesday in October. I was in my darkroom, a small, windowless bathroom I had converted, the sweet, acrid smell of fixer hanging in the air. The faint red glow of the safe light cast eerie shadows on the trays and beakers. I was watching an image emerge on a sheet of paper submerged in the developer, the ghost of a city street slowly gaining substance. It was my favorite part of the process, the magic of creation, of something emerging from nothing. My phone, which I had left on a shelf by the door, began to vibrate, its buzzing a violent intrusion into the sacred quiet. I sighed, annoyed at the interruption, and went to answer it, my fingers still damp. It was Leo. "Hey," I said, my voice hushed out of habit from being in the darkroom. "What's up?" His voice on the other end was a wreck. It was thick and fractured, a sound I had never heard from him before. "Jules," he said, and my name was a splintered thing. Are you home?" "Yeah, I'm here. In the darkroom." "Leo, what's wrong? You sound awful." There was a choked sound, a wet, ragged intake of breath. "It's over," he said, his voice cracking on the final word. "Sarah and I. It's over. I'm coming home." The line went dead. I stood there in the red gloom, the phone still pressed to my ear, the image in the developer tray forgotten. A complex, shameful cocktail of emotions swirled inside me. There was a surge of profound empathy for my friend, a deep, aching sorrow for his pain. I knew how much he had cared for Sarah, but beneath that, shamefully, treacherously, there was a spark of something else. A flicker of hope. It was a vile, opportunistic feeling, and I hated myself for it instantly, pushing it down, burying it under the weight of my concern for him. I quickly cleaned up, my hands moving with an urgency that belied the careful, patient work I had just been doing. I turned on the lights, blinking in the sudden brightness, and went out into the living room to wait. When he arrived 20 minutes later, he looked like a man who had been shipwrecked. The rain had plastered his hair to his forehead, and his coat was soaked through, dripping onto the entryway floor. But it was his eyes that undid me. The bright, Confident light in them was gone, extinguished. They were hollow, lost, the eyes of someone who had just seen their charted course dissolve into an empty, endless ocean. He didn't say a word. He just walked past me, shed his wet coat onto a chair, and collapsed onto the sofa. He curled in on himself, pulling a cushion into his chest and burying his face in it, his broad shoulders shaking with silent sobs. I had never seen him cry, not once in all the years I had known him. I had seen him angry, frustrated, stressed, exhausted, but never this. Never broken. My carefully constructed walls, the ones that separated my feelings from our friendship, crumbled to dust in that instant. All the rules I had made for myself, don't get too close, don't show too much, don't let him see, they all seemed absurd and meaningless in the face of his raw, unfiltered pain. I went to the kitchen and made him a cup of tea, the way my mother used to for me when I was a child with a fever. It was a simple, inadequate gesture, but it was all I could think to do. I set it on the coffee table beside him. He didn't acknowledge it. I sat down in the armchair across from him, a silent sentinel, and I waited. I let the silence hold him, let it be a blanket for his grief. Hours passed. The rain beat a steady rhythm against the windows. The sky outside darkened from gray to black. Finally, when the room was deep in shadow, he stirred. He sat up, his face pale and puffy, his eyes red-rimmed. He looked at me, and his expression was one of dazed, desperate gratitude, like a drowning man who has just found a piece of driftwood to cling to. "Thanks for, he mumbled, his voice hoarse. "You don't have to talk about it," I said softly. He shook his head. She said, "I'm emotionally closed off." He whispered, the words sounding alien in his mouth. She said it feels like there's a part of me she can never reach. A room that's always locked." He looked at me, his gaze so direct it was painful. "Is that true, Jules? Am I like that?" The question was a punch to the gut. The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. Here he was, asking me, the keeper of a secret room the size of a cathedral, if he was the one with locked doors. I didn't know what to say. I just shook my head, a small, helpless gesture. No, I lied, because the truth was too complicated, too cruel. "You're not." He seemed to accept this, or perhaps he was just too exhausted to question it. He lay back down on the sofa, turning his face away from me, and a new kind of silence fell, one filled not with grief, but with a dawning, terrifying confusion. The foundation of his world had been shaken, and in the aftershocks, he began to reach for something, anything, that felt solid. He began to reach for me. That night was the beginning of the ritual. It started innocently enough, born from his grief and my instinct to provide comfort. After sitting in silence for another hour, he finally spoke, his voice muffled by the cushion. "I don't want to be alone tonight." It wasn't a question or a request, just a simple, bleak statement of fact. My mind raced. I could offer him a sleeping pill. I could sit with him until he fell asleep. But my heart, that treacherous organ, chose a different path. "You want to watch a movie or something?" I offered, my voice steadier than I felt. He gave a non-committal shrug. I took it as a yes. I put on some mindless action movie we had both seen a dozen times, something that required no emotional investment, just noise and flashing lights to fill the oppressive quiet. I sat at the far end of the L-shaped sofa, giving him the long section to himself. For a while, we just watched, the blue light of the screen flickering across our faces. But he was restless. He shifted, sighed, and then, slowly, tentatively, he moved. He uncurled himself from his tight ball of misery and stretched out, laying his head in my lap. My entire world stopped. Every coherent thought fled my mind, replaced by a single, deafening roar of white noise. I froze, my body turning to stone. His head was a heavy, warm weight on my thighs. I could feel the heat of him through the denim of my jeans. I could smell the faint, clean scent of his shampoo mixed with the salty tang of dried tears. The action hero on the screen was shouting, cars were exploding, but it was all a distant, meaningless hum. The only reality was the feeling of Leo's hair brushing against my hand, which was resting, frozen, on the cushion beside me. I was terrified to move, terrified to breathe. It felt like a test, a fragile, unspoken agreement I could violate with a single wrong move. He must have sensed my tension, because he shifted slightly, murmuring, "Is this okay?" His voice was thick with sleep, a sound of pure, unadorned vulnerability. My own voice, when it finally came, was a reedy whisper. Yeah, it's okay. And with that permission, he settled, a deep sigh shuddering through his body. He was asleep within minutes. I sat there in the dark, pinned by the weight of him, my heart a frantic, wild thing. This was a new territory, a landscape for which I had no map. His actions were born of grief, I told myself. It was platonic. It was a desperate need for comfort, for simple human contact. He would have done the same with any close friend. I repeated these rationalizations to myself like a mantra, trying to quell the treacherous, soaring hope that was unfurling in my chest. I stayed like that for hours, long after the movie had ended and the screen had gone black. I watched the rise and fall of his chest, the way his brow, so often furrowed with worry lately, was smooth in sleep. This was a permissible intimacy, I reasoned, an act of friendship. But as I finally, carefully, rested my hand on his shoulder, a gesture I hoped could be interpreted as brotherly, the feeling that shot through me was anything but. The first time became the second, and the second became the third. A ritual was forged in the quiet darkness of our living room. It was no longer an explicit request. It was an unspoken assumption. After work, we would make dinner, talk about our days in the clipped, functional way of two people who know each other too well for pleasantries, and then we would migrate to the sofa. The television would go on, a constant, low-level drone that served as the soundtrack to our new arrangement. And at some point, he would shift, and his head would find its way to my lap, or he would stretch out and pull my legs over his, or he would simply lean his entire body against mine, his arm draped over my chest. Each night was a fresh exercise in exquisite torture for me. My body became a landscape of hyper-awareness. I was conscious of every point of contact, every shift in his weight, the texture of his shirt against my arm, the rhythm of his breathing as it slowly deepened and synced with my own. My mind, meanwhile, was a relentless analysis engine, dissecting every gesture, every sigh, searching for meaning, for intent. Was this just comfort? Was he using me as a human pillow, a stand-in for the intimacy he had lost? Or was it something more? The plausible deniability of it all was maddening. His actions existed in a perfect, unassailable gray area. He was my grieving friend. I was providing support. Any other interpretation was a product of my own wishful thinking, a projection of my own secret desires. I lived in a state of constant, low-grade anxiety, suspended between hope and fear. The days were the worst. In the bright, unforgiving light of day, our interactions were painfully normal. We were just roommates. We talked about bills and groceries, about work problems and weekend plans. The intimacy of the night before would feel like a dream, a figment of my imagination. He would laugh his big, booming laugh, and he would seem so much like the old Leo, the unattainable, untouchable son, that I would convince myself I had imagined the whole thing. I would feel a profound sense of shame, as if I had taken advantage of his vulnerability, spinning his pain into a romantic fantasy. I would resolve to end it, to create some distance when he reached for me that night, to gently re-establish the old boundaries. But then night would fall, and the quiet would descend, and the weariness would creep back into his eyes. The confident mask of the day would slip, revealing the lost, lonely man underneath. And he would lean against me, his body seeking mine with an instinctual, magnetic pull, and my resolve would melt away like snow in the spring. I couldn't deny him the comfort he so clearly needed. And if I was being truly honest with myself, I couldn't deny myself the profound, aching joy of having him close. It was a selfish, dangerous joy, a borrowed happiness I knew I would have to pay for later, but I was too weak, too starved for his affection, to refuse it. So the ritual continued. The couch became our island, a separate territory governed by a different set of laws. In the rest of the apartment, we were friends. On the couch, in the dark, we were something else, something undefined and unnamed. I became an expert in the geography of his sleep. I learned the way his fingers would twitch when he was dreaming, the soft, murmuring sounds he would make just before sinking into deep slumber. I learned that he felt safest when he was pressed up against me, a solid, grounding presence in the dark. Sometimes, I would fall asleep too, and we would wake up hours later, tangled together in a way that defied any platonic explanation, our limbs intertwined, my head resting on his chest, his arms securely around my waist. In those first few groggy seconds of waking, before the panic and the overanalysis could kick in, there was a feeling of such profound rightness that it stole my breath. It felt like coming home. Then, things began to escalate, the boundaries blurring even further. One night, after we had been asleep on the couch for a few hours, he woke me up, shifting restlessly. "My neck is killing me," he mumbled, his voice thick and groggy. "This couch is a torture device." He sat up, rubbing the back of his neck, and looked at me. The room was lit only by the faint glow of the city lights through the window. Can we just go to bed?" My heart hammered against my ribs. "What? My bed?" he clarified, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "It's bigger. We'll both fit. I can't sleep like this anymore." He stood up, stretched, and then looked down at me, his hand extended. "Come on." It was a command, not a question. It was offered with such casual, unthinking confidence that to refuse would have been to make it weird, to assign it a significance he clearly wasn't feeling. Or was he? My mind was screaming, a siren of warning and confusion. This was a line, a clear, undeniable line. But his face was open, tired, and completely devoid of artifice. He just wanted to be comfortable. He just wanted to sleep. And he wanted to do it next to me. I took his hand. His skin was warm, his grip firm. He pulled me to my feet, and without letting go, he led me down the short hallway to his room, our silent apartment a witness to this quiet, monumental shift. His room was bigger than mine, dominated by a queen-sized bed. He pulled back the covers on one side and climbed in, then looked at me expectantly, holding the duvet up in invitation. I hesitated for only a second before sliding in beside him. The space felt enormous and yet terrifyingly small. We lay on our backs, side by side, a careful foot of space between us, staring up at the ceiling in the dark. The silence was different here. It was more charged, more intimate. It was the silence of a shared bedroom, not a shared living room. "Thanks, Jules," he whispered into the darkness. "This is better." And then, he rolled onto his side, facing me. He didn't move closer, not yet. He just lay there, looking at me, his eyes dark, unreadable pools in the gloom. I could feel the heat radiating from his body across the small gulf between us. I could hear his breathing, slow and steady. My own breathing was anything but. I was holding myself so still, so rigid, afraid that any movement would shatter the fragile, crystalline moment. After a long, stretched-out minute, he reached out, and, with an almost unbearable tenderness, his fingers brushed a stray strand of hair off my forehead. The touch was electric, a jolt that went straight to my core. It was not the casual, unthinking touch of the couch. This was deliberate. This was intentional. And then he moved, closing the distance between us, and wrapped his arm around my waist, pulling me against him until my back was flush with his chest. He buried his face in the back of my neck, and I felt his breath, warm and soft, on my skin. "Good night," he murmured, his voice already drifting towards sleep. I lay there, cradled in his arms, in his bed, my body a war zone of conflicting emotions. This was no longer plausible deniability. This was not friendship. This was something else entirely. The hope that I had tried so hard to suppress was now a roaring, uncontainable fire. He had pulled me into his orbit, into his bed, into the very center of his world. But the question still remained, a terrifying, unanswered variable. Did he even know what he was doing? Or was I just a convenient source of warmth, a placeholder for a body he missed, a presence to keep the loneliness at bay? I didn't know. And as I finally drifted off to sleep, held securely in his arms, I wasn't sure I cared. For the first time in years, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The reckoning could wait until morning. The ritual of the bed replaced the ritual of the couch. It became our new normal. We would finish our evening, and then one of us, usually him, would say, "Ready for bed?" And we would retreat to his room together. The pretense that it was about the couch being uncomfortable was dropped. It was never spoken of, but it was understood. We slept better together. The arrangement was a strange paradox. It was the most intimate I had ever been with anyone, and yet it was entirely chaste. We would hold each other, our bodies pressed close through the night, a silent conversation of touch and warmth. but it never went further. It was a haven of physical closeness that stopped just short of the romantic, existing in a self-contained bubble of ambiguity. For Leo, it seemed to be a source of deep, uncomplicated comfort. For me, it was a nightly tightrope walk over a canyon of yearning. Then came the night of the knock. It had been about a month since the bed-sharing began. We had fallen into the routine so completely that it felt as natural as breathing. But that day, something had been different. A new tension had entered the apartment, a subtle shift in the atmospheric pressure that I couldn't quite name. Leo had been quiet all evening, distant. He had received a text message at dinner that had made him frown, and he had retreated into himself afterward. When we went to bed, the easy comfort was gone. He lay on his side of the bed, his back to me, a rigid, unmovable wall. The space between us, which had vanished over the weeks, was back, a cold, empty expanse in the middle of the mattress. I lay on my back, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. Had I done something? Had he finally come to his senses, realized the strangeness of our situation? Was this the end? The silence was heavy, suffocating. After an hour of this silent torture, I couldn't take it anymore. I slipped out of his bed, my movements slow and quiet, and retreated to my own room. I felt a profound sense of loss, a hollow ache in my chest. It was over. I had been a fool to let myself hope. I had been a temporary comfort, a stopgap, and now, my services were no longer required. I curled up in my own cold bed, the familiar loneliness wrapping around me like a shroud. And that is where he found me, lying in the dark, mourning the loss of something I never truly had. That is when I heard his whispered question from the hallway, a question I refused to answer. And that is when I heard the soft, hesitant knock, the sound that said he was crossing the boundary anyway, the sound that changed everything. He stepped into the room and quietly closed the door behind him, plunging us into a near-total darkness, broken only by the faint slivers of moonlight. I could hear him moving, the soft shuffle of his bare feet on the hardwood floor. He didn't turn on a light. He navigated the room by memory, his form a moving shadow that came to a stop beside my bed. I held my breath, my heart pounding a frantic, desperate rhythm against my ribs. What was he going to do? What was he going to say? He didn't say anything. He simply pulled back the covers of my bed and slid in beside me. The mattress dipped with his weight, and the cold space in my bed was suddenly filled with his warmth. He lay on his side, facing me, propped up on one elbow. I could just make out the shape of his face in the gloom, the dark slash of his brows, the curve of his mouth. He was so close I could feel his breath on my cheek. It was warm and smelled faintly of mint from the toothpaste we shared. "You left," he whispered. The words were not an accusation. They were a statement of loss, of bewilderment. I finally found my voice, though it was barely a croak. You seemed like you wanted space." He was silent for a long moment, and I could feel him looking at me, his gaze intense even in the darkness. "I never want space from you," he said, and the simple, direct honesty of it struck me like a physical blow. The opposite of that. Always the opposite. He shifted, moving closer still, until his knee was touching mine, a small point of contact that sent a shockwave through my entire system. "I got a text from Sarah tonight," he said quietly. "She's seeing someone new." It made it feel real. Final. I didn't know what to say to that. "I'm sorry, Leo." "Don't be," he said, and there was a strange new tone in his voice, something I had never heard before. It was a mix of discovery and fear. That's the weird thing. I thought I would be devastated. And I was sad, for a minute, I guess. But mostly, I just wanted to come in here and tell you. He paused, and his next words were so quiet I almost didn't hear them. "You're the first person I want to tell everything to. Good or bad. You're just my person. My person." The words echoed in the silent room, in the silent chambers of my heart. It was everything I had ever wanted to be to him, and hearing him say it so simply, so openly, was both a profound gift and an unbearable cruelty. He was my person, too, but in a way he would never understand. I must have made some small sound, a choked intake of breath, because he shifted again, his hand coming up to cup my jaw. His thumb stroked softly across my cheek, a gesture of such exquisite tenderness that it brought tears to my eyes. The barrier was gone. The ambiguity, the plausible deniability, it had all evaporated in the charged intimacy of my small, dark room. This was no longer about comfort for a grieving friend. This was something else. This was a choice. He had left his own bed to seek me out, to close the distance I had tried to put between us. "Julian," he whispered, his voice thick with an emotion I couldn't decipher. It was yearning. It was confusion. It was fear. It was the sound of a man standing on the edge of a cliff, finally looking down. He leaned in, and his forehead came to rest against mine. We stayed like that, breathing the same air, our worlds condensed to this single point of contact. "Leo," I breathed, my own voice trembling. He pulled back just enough to look at me, his eyes searching mine in the dark. I could feel the question hanging between us, unspoken but deafening. It was the real question, the one that had been building for weeks, for months, for years. And I knew, with a sudden, gut-wrenching clarity, that I couldn't live in the ambiguity anymore. I needed to know. But he was the one who broke the silence. He was the one who finally gave voice to the terrifying, beautiful thing that had grown between us in the dark. "Would it be okay?" he whispered, his voice raw, vulnerable, stripped of all his usual confidence. "Jules, would it be okay if I kissed you?" The question was a key, turning the lock on the secret room in my heart, the one I had kept hidden for so long. The door swung open, and all the light, all the love, all the years of silent yearning came rushing out. There was no more fear, no more analysis, no more doubt. There was only him, here, asking. I didn't trust myself to speak. I just nodded, a small, jerky movement in the dark. And then, slowly, tentatively, as if he were handling something infinitely fragile, he leaned in and pressed his lips to mine. It was not a passionate kiss. It was not demanding or confident. It was a question asked in a different language. It was soft and hesitant and deeply, profoundly gentle. It was the kiss of a man who was discovering a new world and was terrified of breaking it. It was a confession. It was an apology. It was a beginning. I brought my hand up to his neck, my fingers tangling in the soft hair at his nape, and I kissed him back, pouring all the unspoken years, all the secret love, all the quiet, patient waiting into that one, simple, world-altering touch. In the darkness of my room, surrounded by the ghosts of my loneliness, I was finally home. The aftermath was not the explosion of clarity I had anticipated. It was a slow, confusing dawn, filled with more shadows than light. The kiss, which had felt so definitive in the dark, became a source of intense, terrifying ambiguity in the days that followed. It was as if we had crossed a vast, uncharted ocean in the dead of night, only to find ourselves shipwrecked on a strange and unfamiliar shore, with no idea how to navigate the new terrain. Leo retreated. It was not a sudden, dramatic withdrawal, but a slow, creeping tide of distance that left me feeling more alone than ever. The morning after the kiss, I woke up alone in my bed. The space beside me was cold. For a panicked moment, I thought I had dreamed it all, that the entire encounter had been a hallucination born of my own desperate longing. But then I saw his pillow, still indented with the shape of his head, left behind on my bed. He had been there. It had been real. I found him in the kitchen, already dressed for work, making coffee with a tense, focused energy. He didn't meet my eyes. He just handed me a mug and muttered a morning that was clipped and impersonal. The easy intimacy of our shared space was gone, replaced by a thick, suffocating awkwardness. The rituals that had defined our lives for the past few months vanished. There were no more shared movie nights on the couch, no more lingering conversations over dinner, and the door to his bedroom, which had become an open invitation, was now firmly, unequivocally closed every night. He would come home from work, offer a few perfunctory words, and then disappear into his room, the click of the latch echoing through the silent apartment like a gunshot. He was building walls between us, brick by painful brick, and I was forced to stand by and watch, my heart breaking with each one he laid. I was lost in a sea of confusion and hurt. Had I misread everything? Was the kiss a mistake, an anomaly born of his emotional turmoil over Sarah? Had he woken up in the clear light of day and been horrified by what he had done? The questions tormented me, replaying in an endless, torturous loop. I tried to analyze the kiss itself, to dissect it for clues. It had been so gentle, so full of a feeling that I had been sure was reciprocated. But his behavior now was a direct, brutal contradiction to that feeling. He was treating me like a stranger, like a source of shame he couldn't bear to look at. After 3 days of this silent, cold war, I couldn't take it anymore. The pain of his avoidance was worse than the pain of a direct rejection. The ambiguity was eating me alive. I had spent years as the quiet observer, the passive presence in his life. But that kiss had changed me. It had given me a taste of something real, and I couldn't go back to subsisting on scraps of imagined affection. I had to know the truth, no matter how much it hurt. I had to force the confrontation. I waited for him to come home from work. I heard his keys in the lock, the familiar sound of the door opening. He walked in, his shoulders slumped with a weariness that seemed to go deeper than just a long day at the office. He started to head straight for his room, as had become his new custom, his eyes fixed on the floor. "Leo," I said. My voice was quiet, but it stopped him in his tracks. He froze, his hand on his doorknob, his back still to me. "We need to talk," I continued, my voice gaining a strength I didn't know I possessed. He let out a long, ragged sigh, a sound of pure defeat. He slowly turned around to face me. He looked terrible. There were dark circles under his eyes, and the easy confidence that was so integral to his being was completely gone. He looked like a frightened boy. "Jules," he started, his voice cracking. "I can't." "You can't?" I asked, and the hurt I had been suppressing finally bled into my tone. "You can't talk to me? After everything? You can kiss me, you can sleep in my bed, you can hold me all night, but you can't talk to me." He flinched as if I had struck him. He ran a hand over his face, a gesture of sheer desperation. "It's not that simple." "Then make it simple for me, Leo," I said, my voice rising with a frustration that was years in the making. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you regret it. It looks like you're disgusted by it. By me. And if that's the case, you owe me the decency of saying it to my face instead of hiding in your room like a coward." The word coward hung in the air between us, a stark and ugly thing. His head snapped up, his eyes flashing with a spark of his old fire, mixed with a deep, profound hurt. "Don't call me that," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Then don't act like one." I shot back, taking a step toward him. "What do you want me to think, Leo? You come into my room, you tell me I'm your person, you ask to kiss me, and then you treat me like I don't exist. What the hell am I supposed to do with that?" He finally broke. The anger drained out of him, replaced by a wave of raw, unshielded despair. He stumbled over to the sofa, our island, now a deserted piece of furniture, and sank into it, burying his face in his hands. His shoulders began to shake, and this time, his sobs were not silent. They were ragged, ugly, wrenching sounds that tore through the quiet of the apartment. It was the sound of a man completely coming apart. My anger evaporated instantly, replaced by the familiar, overwhelming urge to comfort him. I went and sat beside him, not touching him, just being there, a silent presence once again. After a long time, his sobs subsided into shuddering breaths. He finally lifted his head from his hands and looked at me, his eyes red and swollen, his face a mask of misery and confusion. "I'm not disgusted," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "God, Jules, no. It's the opposite. That's what's so terrifying." He took a deep, shaky breath, as if steeling himself to make a confession. "All my life," he began, his gaze fixed on some distant point over my shoulder, "I've had this map, you know? A map of how my life is supposed to go. College, job, girlfriend, wife, house, kids. It's all laid out, the path is clear. I've always known the destination." He finally looked at me, his eyes pleading for understanding. And then Sarah left, and I was lost. The map was useless. Everything was just gray. And the only thing that felt real, the only thing that felt like solid ground, was you. He swallowed hard, his throat working. "Lying here with you, on this couch. Sleeping in the same bed. It was the only time the noise in my head stopped. It was the only time I felt safe. And I told myself it was just friendship, that I was just lonely, because that fit the map. Best friend helps you through a breakup. That's a normal stop on the journey." But then he trailed off, shaking his head. "That night, in your room, when I kissed you, it wasn't about being lonely. It wasn't about Sarah. It was about you. It was just you. And it felt," he struggled for the word, his hands clenching and unclenching in his lap. "It felt more right than anything on that stupid map ever has." It felt like I was finally heading in the right direction, even though it was a place I never, ever thought I would go. He looked at me, his face a portrait of raw vulnerability. And that scares the hell out of me, Julian. Because I don't know who I am anymore. I look in the mirror, and I don't recognize the person looking back. The kiss. It wasn't a mistake. It was a revelation. And I have no idea what to do with it. So I ran. I hid. Because it's easier to hide than to face the fact that my entire life, everything I thought I knew about myself, might have been wrong. His confession hung in the air between us, a fragile, beautiful, terrifying thing. All the hurt, all the anger I had felt, dissolved into a profound, aching empathy. He wasn't rejecting me. He was terrified of accepting himself. He hadn't been running from me. He had been running from the truth the kiss had revealed. I finally understood. The unknowing initiator had finally been forced to know, and the knowledge had shattered him. I reached out, my hand covering his where it rested on the cushion. His skin was cold. He looked down at our hands, then back up at my face. "I'm so sorry, Jules," he whispered. "I've been such an idiot. I hurt you." "You did," I admitted, my voice soft. "But I think I understand." I gave his hand a gentle squeeze. "You don't have to have it all figured out, Leo. You don't need a map. Sometimes, you just have to look at the person next to you and decide if you want to take the next step with them." A single tear traced a path down his cheek. "And what if I'm scared to take that step?" "Then I'll be scared with you," I said. A fragile, watery smile touched his lips, the first real smile I had seen from him in days. He tightened his grip on my hand, lacing his fingers with mine. We sat there for a long time, on the couch that had been the stage for our silent, unfolding love story, our hands clasped together, the silence no longer suffocating, but filled with a new, tentative hope. The storm had passed. The wreckage was all around us. But for the first time, we were looking at it together, ready to start rebuilding. The conversation that followed was not a grand, romantic declaration. It was quiet and halting and honest. We talked for hours, the light outside the window fading from dusk to deep night. He talked about his fear, his confusion, the pressure he had always felt to be a certain kind of man. I talked about my years of silent affection, the careful fortress I had built around my heart, and how his grief, his unconscious need, had dismantled it piece by piece. We laid our vulnerabilities bare, creating a new, shared landscape of trust between us. There were no easy answers. We didn't suddenly have a label for what we were. But for the first time, the ambiguity was gone. It was replaced by a shared intention, to figure it out, together. The resolution was not a moment, but a process. It was a slow, deliberate reconstruction of our world on a new and honest foundation. The grand, sweeping gestures of romance you see in movies were absent. Our love story was written in the quiet, domestic prose of everyday life. It was in the way he started leaving his bedroom door open again, not as a sign of ambiguous need, but as a clear and open invitation. It was in the way I would wake up in the middle of the night and find him watching me, a look of quiet wonder on his face, as if he still couldn't quite believe I was real. The couch, once a place of exquisite tension, became a place of simple, easy comfort. We would still cuddle while watching movies, but now there was no overanalysis, no frantic internal monologue on my part. His head would rest on my shoulder, and I would wrap my arm around him, and it was just normal. It was us. The touch was no longer a question, but a statement of belonging. One Saturday morning, a few weeks after our talk, I was in my darkroom, developing the photos I had taken in the days leading up to the kiss. They were street scenes, mostly, filled with anonymous figures and stark city architecture. But as I watched the images emerge in the developer tray, I saw that they were all imbued with a sense of loneliness, of longing. They were pictures of isolation. I was so engrossed in my work that I didn't hear him come in until he spoke, his voice soft in the red gloom. "What are you doing?" he asked. I looked up, surprised. He had never come into my darkroom before. He had always respected it as my private, sacred space. He was standing by the door, his silhouette framed by the red safe light, just as it had been that night in my bedroom doorway. But this time, there was no hesitation in his posture. He was just curious, interested. "Developing," I said. "Just some old stuff." He came further into the small room, peering over my shoulder at the image floating in the tray. It was a shot of a single, empty bench in a park at dusk. "It's sad," he said quietly. "I guess it is," I admitted. He was silent for a moment, watching me work, his presence a warm, solid comfort at my back. "You should take pictures of us," he said, his voice soft. I turned to look at him. "What? Us?" he repeated, a small smile playing on his lips. "Here, in the apartment, making coffee, reading on the couch. Just us. I think those pictures wouldn't be sad." And in that moment, in the quiet, creative sanctuary of my darkroom, I felt the final piece of the puzzle click into place. He wasn't just accepting what was between us. He was actively wanting to build it, to document it, to create a new story with me. He wanted to replace the images of loneliness with images of togetherness. That night, we were lying in my bed, the larger space of his room abandoned in favor of the place where it had all begun. We were talking quietly, our legs tangled together, my head resting on his chest. I could feel the steady, reassuring beat of his heart beneath my ear. He was tracing idle patterns on my back with his fingers, a soothing, hypnotic touch. "You know," he said, his voice a low rumble in his chest. I threw out the map. I lifted my head to look at him. "The map?" "Yeah," he said, his eyes soft and clear in the dim light from the hallway. "The one for my life." I realized it was leading me somewhere I didn't actually want to go. "It's kind of terrifying, not having 1 inch." He paused, his hand coming up to cup my face. "But then I look at you, and I feel like I don't need a map. I just need a compass. And you're my compass, Jules. You always point me home." He leaned down and kissed me, and this time, there was no hesitation, no question. It was a kiss of certainty, of peace, of profound, quiet love. It was a kiss that promised a future, not one that was planned or charted, but one that we would discover together, one step at a time. As I kissed him back, I thought about that first knock on my door, the sound that had been the hinge on which my entire world had turned. It had arrived disguised as a moment of ordinary need, a simple request not to be alone. But it had been so much more. It was the sound of a heart, lost in the dark, searching for its true north. And in the beautiful, honest silence we had learned to create together, we had both, finally, found our way home.